Good day. I'm Brionna Denby, Senior Counsel at the law firm of Cohen Seglias. Today, we have a special episode of The Bar, Meet the Candidate. We are here with Miss Lydia York, a member of the Delaware Bar. She was born in Southern Pines, North Carolina, and moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with her parents at the age of 6. She attended the Pittsburgh Public Schools and graduated from Peabody High School. She studied piano and cello and participated in all-city orchestra. She lettered in swimming, volleyball, and basketball. Ms. York attended Florida A&M University and graduated magna cum laude and majored in accounting. At Florida A&M, she pledged Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Upon graduation, she returned to Pittsburgh and worked at Coopers and Lybrand, now PricewaterhouseCoopers, an American supply company, now TrueServe, as an accounting supervisor. Ms. York attended the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and graduated with a concentration in finance. She went on to work for Mellon Bank in credit policy and later worked for the Westinghouse Finance Company as a senior financial analyst. She worked at Duquesne Light Company as a senior financial consultant and then Montauk, a financial subsidiary. Ms. York obtained 2 law degrees from Temple University, an LLM in taxation, and a Juris Doctorate. Ms. York currently serves as the chairman of investments for the Episcopal Church of Delaware and serves as trustee of the diocese. Prior to running for office, Ms. York served as the treasurer of the Newcastle County Democratic Committee. So, Ms. York, that was an awesome, awesome bio, and I'm just so honored to be with you today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So is there anything that we missed in your bio that you want to tell us about yourself?
That pretty much covers it, but I also like to emphasize that throughout that time, I was just working and doing what I thought one's supposed to do. I was participating in my sorority life as well as, church life. And leading, I thought, just a relatively quiet life of, I hope, excellence in service.
And what made you enter the field of finance and accounting? What made you enter that field?
To be honest with you, that was motivated by Dr. Sybil Collins-Mobley, who was the dean of the School of Business at Florida A&M.
Okay.
She literally came to my high school one day and said that I ought to do that. And my parents, who also went to HBCUs, thought that that would be a really cool thing also, because they were a little nervous about the music thing. But I said, well, okay, I'll give it a year. And if they said, and they told me, so if you're really unhappy, you can always graduate. You can always, transfer back to something that you prefer.
Sure.
But I went there and loved it. Loved accounting, loved the school, all of that.
Why Florida A&M and why an HBCU?
Well, the HBCU part is easy because my sister went to Bennett, my mother went to what is now North Carolina Central, and my father went to Shaw.
Sure.
So that makes it easy to go to an HBCU.
Those are all in North Carolina, right?
They are,
right?
actually.
Yep.
But we weren't living in North Carolina at the time, and Florida A&M was it's a good school. It's a well-known HBCU. It's pretty big, and my parents' real desire, though, was that they said I should go away to school. And they thought that Tallahassee would be far enough.
I would think so.
I think if they could have swung it, I'd be in school in Miami. The further away, the better. I think they said the point of going to school is to go away, was their thinking.
And I too went away. I mean, talk about the benefits of leaving sort of the nest or what is known to you to be home.
It's going to force you to finish growing up. Generally speaking, I think your parents probably, do a really good job of raising you to a certain point, but at some point you've got to do it for yourself on your own. And especially back then when we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have the internet and all of that, you were on your own.
Yeah.
In a significant way.
I think so.
And you had to make your phone calls on the weekend when the rates were low. And that was pretty much the only time I talked to my parents. And if we talked outside that time frame, we had a standing appointment. If we talked outside that was like really some kind of an emergency.
Okay.
But like I said, you finish growing up, and then and I think being in an HBCU, you can finish that development in a very comfortable and supportive environment.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important benefit of attending an HBCU.
That's awesome. So, of course, I know you as a member of the Delaware Bar. Talk about how long have you been a member of the Delaware Bar?
I've been a member of the Delaware Bar since 2010. I actually, when I first came out of law school, took the New Jersey and Pennsylvania bar.
Okay.
And I actually clerked for a year in New Jersey in the Superior Courts. But and after that, I think my plan really was to move back to Pittsburgh, where I have, some of my oldest friends are there, where I think I understood how one navigates the elder scene a little better. But at the time, my best friend, who's a physician, pretty much told me that doing that might confuse my mother sufficiently that it would actually shorten her life. So I said, I guess I better stay. And if I'm going to stay, I'm going to need to be a member of the Delaware Bar.
And this was, you decided to attend law school after you were a finance professional.
Oh yeah, that was, I'm a mid-career change into the legal profession. My first roughly 15, 20 years was in accounting and finance and other kinds of related activities.
Yeah.
And then, as my family would describe it, I fell and bumped my head and went to law school. And there, early on, I really did want to do something in the taxation or the estate planning area, which is, I think, an area that's, for African Americans and most people of color, and even immigrants just to this country, that's an underserved area that's really important.
And why do you think that is?
Well, this area of law deals specifically with the generational transfer of wealth. From one generation to another. And when it's not handled well, the generation is basically starting over. And African Americans in particular have, for all kinds of reasons, struggled to maintain wealth within a lifetime, let alone passing it to another generation. And a lot of that is because we've both been denied access to the system that protects that.
Right.
And then after that was no longer the issue, we didn't trust the mechanisms for making that happen.
Okay.
So, as I said, this is sort of an underserved area, and I just think it's an area that if there were lawyers who are African American, we can at least bridge some of that hesitation and mistrust.
So I know there's probably so much there, but maybe 5 tips that you could give to someone if they're interested in creating generational wealth. What sorts of things should they do?
I think one of the important things they need to do is to have a plan. It doesn't happen by accident. The story that I like to tell is when we were doing the checklists for joining the Delaware Bar.
For the Delaware Bar, yeah.
You may recall that one of those events was to go review 3 or 4 will files at the Register of Wills. Well, at least when I swung through there, one of those files was a DuPont will file. And if one thumbs through their will, you see pages, and I think it was like 30 pages of distributions to various kinds of trusts, which are both private, and we'll never know exactly who the beneficiaries of those trusts are. Okay. So that takes planning. So step one is you need to plan that out. Okay. Second of all, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say you need to have a will. Why? Because as I tell people, if you don't have a will, the state has written one for you. And that's going to include children that you may be disconnected from or didn't really intend to have benefit from your wealth. Or if that's not the case, you may end up with relatives that you don't even necessarily are in communication with. Sure. And so your wealth is dispersed just because you didn't really sort of cabin it and leave it in a pot that somebody could work with in the future. Okay. A third thing would be you should make the administrators, the people that you've asked to be the administrators, they need to be aware of what your real intentions are. Okay. Okay, and you need to pick people who are going to do what you've written down. So
let me speak to that, because I've seen and heard of scenarios where people are so private, they may create a will, but it's locked away, you don't know it exists, you don't know who the administrator, executor, executrix is. I mean, people can be, and especially people of color, can be just so private about their finances. So can you speak a little bit more about that?
Sure. I'm going to put in a plug for the Newcastle County Register of Wills.
Okay.
They run a service where they can hold the will. They'll hold the original will, which is what you're going to need when it's time to enter it into probate. They can hold that for you so that we know where it is. And the family, you can just leave basically there's a receipt. You go look at the Register of Wills and they'll have everything there already. and I normally tell my clients, I said, it should be in a safe place that's reachable. Okay, we now have some new rules here in Delaware that you can leave it in a safety deposit box and they can get into it for the sole purpose of removing a will. Okay, but it's, that's sort of, in my mind, that's plan B, because plan A ought to be, your administrator ought to know where some of this stuff is. And the thing is, they don't need to read it then, they just need to know where it is. Okay, the fourth thing is, and maybe it's because it is my stock and trade nowadays, you might want to think about a trust, because trusts outlive us. And it's easier, and the distribution of the assets can happen faster if you've sort of set it up that way, and then you don't have the problem of unintended beneficiaries benefiting, because that's sometimes a problem. And the question, I'm just going to put one in you didn't ask. A lot of folks, oh, my kids are joint holders on my bank account, and I'm thinking, no. That's what a power of attorney is for. And I know banks don't like them, but they're legal documents if properly executed. And what'll happen is, the law says it becomes the joint holder's property. If the rest of the family doesn't fuss or raise an issue, it's going to stay that way. Because that's what the law actually provides, is that the joint holder of the property is going to be the survivor. They get to keep it all. Now, there's other folks who raise a contention and all that, but now you've introduced a complication into a situation where people are grieving and mourning.
So just putting someone's name as a joint account holder is not enough?
No, it's not enough. And what you really ought to do is just leave your name on there by yourself and let them be the power of attorney. Okay, so that's what that's for.
Okay, so you mentioned a trust, and I think a lot of times people have the thought and sentiment that trusts are for rich people, wealthy people.
I would suggest that trusts are how the wealthy stay that way. Because, as I said, trusts survive the grantor, the person who creates the trust. And the trust itself can be a separate entity. I can riff on this for quite some time.
But this is important.
But the trust is going to set up a mechanism that is going to be outside. It can be both. It'll be private. So sometimes folks have complicated family situations. This can stay private. No one will need to know the details of why this child got X and why that child got Y. Nobody will know, but they'll just get checks. Okay. But trusts are also a mechanism for holding wealth. And a lot of times, in fact, just recently, I had a client who ultimately had 7 or 8 children. And it was a list, and I just picked up the list, and she was in for the right reason. She was in to create a trust. But as we were working through the distributions to the various children, I just looked at the list and said, somebody on this list has a substance abuse issue, right? Okay, so you don't want to give them money with no restriction. Okay, I looked on there and I said, one of these people has married someone you disapprove of. You don't want them to benefit from your wealth either. Okay? There's all kinds of reasons why you might want to treat your children differently. And it's a little easier to work that out in a trust, because everybody doesn't necessarily, they'll see it eventually, but you can really sort of state your reasons, and the trustee can act inside that authority. And then there's all kinds, and then there's some tax reasons, which may be coming back into vogue, we don't know. Because we sort of tend to plan as if you might need them, but if you don't, you don't. And then there's the issue of protecting the assets as well. Depending on the form of trust that one uses, you can do that.
So someone describing themselves as a mid-level professional or a middle class or even working class individual could benefit from having a trust if they have some complex family dynamics.
Complex family dynamics. Blended families is the most common, which is very common these days. And the other one is if you hold property and you have multiple children. This doesn't force 5 people onto a deed, and then you have to get 5 people's approval to either sell the house or keep the house, or who's going to pay for the rent. Who's going to pay the taxes on the house. That becomes another issue. But if it's all in one entity and you've left directions for how the house should be handled, you don't have to worry about that.
And
that comes up a lot. And because I heard it a lot. I want to treat all my children the same. And I was thinking, I know that you love them all, but you don't even love them all the same. you can't treat them all the same, especially at the end, because then there's going to be the kid that's been gone for, for 15 or 20 years, and then there's the one that was there with your parents at the very end. And it gets complicated, and which is why I tell people that you should do this when you're really in fairly good health, when you're relatively young, and can be clear-eyed about it.
Okay.
So,
and I think I asked for 5, so the 5th tip you could give someone about why seeking out a will, trust, and estate attorney is important.
They're going to advise you to choose an administrator who can actually do the work, who can make those hard decisions. I think one of the easiest probates I've ever been involved with was a person who passed away, and she managed to wrangle a friend into being the administrator because one of her kids had a substance abuse problem. One was estranged, and one was just sort of uninvolved in all of that. And this person was able to sort of step in, do the things that needed to be done in a way that was going to be respectful of the children in their position and respectful of her wishes without getting caught up in the family dynamic. Because then there's going to be, why are they in charge? I tell people I practice family law after the fact.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and these things can be complicated. So, I mean, that is such an important area of law, wills, trusts, and estates, and that's been your primary practice.
Yes.
What experience do you have outside of the practice of law?
Outside of the practice of law, I've been involved in politics here in Delaware, specifically in the Democratic Party. I was asked, way around the time I became an attorney here, or was admitted to the bar here, to be the parliamentarian of the Newcastle County Executive Committee. And that was, for me, I was like, oh boy, I get to be on a political committee and I can meet all these people, and the elected officials come by from time to time and say hello, and they update the party, and I was there to help them interpret the rules. As those things come up, because as I tell you, the rules are there to ensure fair play and to make sure that everybody is treated the same, which is an important legal concept. Absolutely.
So that experience working with the Democratic Committee for Newcastle County, how did that kind of segue with your practice of law? Did it benefit? Did it cause you to take away from your practice?
I don't think so. Certainly being parliamentarian, it didn't detract in any way. I think I had the opportunity to participate in a way that was meaningful to the party and meaningful to me as well. And I got to know more people that were, more activists that were Democrats and getting folks elected, which is really what the party is for, is to advance its platform and to get folks elected.
Awesome. All right, so I hear that you have some new plans on the horizon.
I do indeed.
All right, let's talk about that. What are those plans?
Right now, I'm a candidate for State Auditor of Accounts. I think that my background lends itself, I kind of lean into that position based on my background.
Well, what kind of requirements does one need to have for that political office?
For any political office here in Delaware, most of the requirements are really only age and residency. So, as a technical matter, the Attorney General doesn't necessarily need to be an attorney. And so for quite some time in Delaware, the elected state auditor has not necessarily been an accounting professional. I think that in this day and age, that would be important, just as a matter of bringing the right skills to bear.
Well, what kinds of things does the Auditor of Accounts, what kind of things do they handle?
So the office, since this is the bar, the office is described in Title 29 and
of the Delaware Code.
Of the Delaware Code.
Right.
And the purpose, the prescription here is to monitor that all appropriate receipts are brought into the proper agency and recorded appropriately, and that all expenditures are appropriate and have been called for by the state legislature. So that's just one thing. There are some other things that the auditor is responsible for. Specifically, they're to actually audit the school districts and report on what they've, the audit report should be shared both with the General Assembly and the Department of Education, as well as a copy left in the libraries in that system.
And are these public schools?
These are the public schools, yes.
What about charter schools?
Well, Charter schools that are part of a school district,
Okay.
I think we're going to fall under that easily enough. I know some of the charters are actually chartered by the state. I think they get caught up in another
Okay.
area. It's interesting that this particular office gets referenced in other parts of the code.
Okay.
The actual description in Title 29 is that it's not just that.
Okay.
There are other things that the auditor is supposed to be participating in and doing and reporting. Okay, so that's one of the things that, when I first started talking to folks about maybe doing this, one of the early complaints, the most frequent complaint, was around the school districts.
Wow.
That they, we don't know what's going on there, and to be sure, that's the largest avenue of money coming into the state is for education.
Understandably.
And so it's not that it's a black hole, and I'm confident that it's not as if the money is being misspent, but the truth is we don't know how exactly that's happening.
So the auditor is, for lack of better words, the watchdog of the state's monies in many parts or many agencies of the states, including the schools.
Right. It's, I can't quote quite exactly what the way the statute states it, but we're supposed to be reviewing all the other state agencies. And
all of them.
All the state agencies and
Okay.
other kinds of things that are created by state agencies. Interestingly, there's two places where it says we're supposed to look at the University of Delaware for the state funds that are received by the University of Delaware, and of course by extension, Delaware State University.
Okay.
And so like I said, there's a lot of, I would suggest that perhaps there should be more activity than there has been in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes people don't think about that office, and even when I think about voting, it's sometimes way, way down at the bottom of the ballot.
It often appears at the bottom of the ballot. It's one of the 5 constitutional offices in this state, and you're right, it's at the bottom of the ballot.
I mean, and since it's at the bottom, and maybe people are less familiar with that office, can you tell our viewers why voters should be interested in this particular office?
There's a number of reasons why they should be interested in this office. One is that to make sure that the work is getting done. That's an important concept. Is the legislature budgeted X for Y. Did that happen? Was it spent that way?
Okay.
Was it spent appropriately? Was it spent efficiently? And we don't have to necessarily talk about did they hit their program targets, but that's something that's not entirely outside the review either.
Okay.
Another reason folks should be interested in this office is that ultimately this particular office is prescribed as being on the Board of Pardons and Commutations.
Well, that's very different from what you said the description outlined, which is, reviewing budgets
Exactly.
and making sure that the monies are spent appropriately, which to my mind, that's the first thing I think of with an auditor. So this individual who serves in this position also serves on the Board of Pardons?
Pardons and Commutations. Yeah.
Okay, talk about that.
Well, the Board of Pardons and Commutations is described somewhere else in the Delaware Code.
Sure.
And it prescribes who the members are.
Okay.
The members are the Lieutenant Governor, the Secretary of State, so there's an appointed office, the Chancellor from the Judicial Office, but doesn't hear criminal.
Okay.
And then it's the Insurance Commissioner, the State Treasurer, and the State Auditor.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, I mean, it's a big group of individuals really maybe deciding someone's fate, determining whether
Most
or not,
likely
right?
deciding someone's fate.
Right.
And based on the continuing stigma that's associated with having even completed a term, even for a felony, it's important sometimes if, years down the road, the offense wasn't violent and the person's not continuing, this is the kind of thing that can hold back, reintegration into the community. And that's an important thing to keep people from falling back into crime.
So it's really important that the office holders that comprise the pardons decisions should also be diverse, would you say?
I would agree with that. I mean, all the areas that touch the people ought to be representative of the people.
Right.
And, that would include, let's start with the bar. Notoriously not representing the people
Right.
for all kinds of reasons, some of which can be worked on and some of which we're working at.
Right.
The judicial branch, ought to be more reflective of the folks that are coming through there.
Certainly.
The legislature, that's an area where politics and politicians can make some real changes.
Okay.
To actually represent the people that are in their districts. I mean, we just went through a redistricting, and the whole purpose there is to make sure that communities stay together and get to vote together, and that's why it's important that people come out and vote.
Right. Right.
Okay, because that's where you get to say this is the system we're working in.
Right.
Representative democracy, and if you choose not to represent or be represented, I would suggest it's your loss because someone else is making these decisions.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. So, we talked a lot about your accounting and finance background, and then also as a practitioner in the areas of wills, trusts, and estates. So what exactly are the qualifications for Auditor of Accounts?
Age and residency.
So do you need to have any kind of financial background to hold that public office?
Just like you don't need to be an attorney, to be the Attorney General. I think it helps a lot to understand what it is your office is actually doing, what it is that's actually occurring in the trenches there. And it's, I think, probably even more important that you have a background in management.
Okay.
Because, right now the office is, I believe it's around 22 to 25 professionals.
Okay.
Okay. That's a bunch of folks. And it's important that that you understand what it is they're doing.
Right.
But the other half of management, and I'd like to emphasize this, the other half of management is they need to have trust in the person that's in charge.
Okay.
And that's an important thing that's an important thing that helps people get their work done.
I would think so.
And, my personal management philosophy, you can ask the folks who've ever worked for me, I've really only ever asked of them two things, one of which is truly relevant here, which is my job, my real job, is to remove the obstacles to your doing your job. Okay,
Yeah.
If you make me look good, I will do my best to make you happy when you take your paycheck
That's
home.
awesome. I wish more managers thought that way.
But because this is all a group effort, okay? Yeah. I'm just the first among, I think of myself just simply the first among equals. And it's important that everyone, have their shoulder on the wheel and moving the process forward, because that's what this is all about. And auditing in particular is about process. That's what it's for. That's what we're really examining, is the process that's in place going to get the job done. I think I just related recently, I said when I worked at Mellon Bank, one of the things that one does as a bank officer, you eventually see the sorting floor, where they used to put the canceled checks in your bank statement.
Okay.
I always thought it was a minor miracle that happened correctly. I mean, people can only maybe count once or twice in their lives where they either didn't get a check back or there was a real mistake in what they got.
Yeah.
I think it's a minor miracle. That's process. That's how that happens. They've got a process in place, and they can deal with the exceptions, but what they're really dealing with is process.
Okay. So you've done so much in your professional career, and you've decided to take this leap into running for a political office. Why did you do that? Why now?
Why now? Let's talk about the why now. I was a caregiver. One of the, I really kind of twisted my practice around my ability to care for my mother.
Okay.
And I lost my mother in 2020.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But I have to add, she was 98.
Okay.
So while I wish I still had her here,
Right.
She had a good life, and I, moved heaven and earth, taking care of her.
Sure.
And which is why I could never think about doing anything more serious than, I was once a delegate to the DNC, where I had to sort of coordinate with my sister for her to come watch my mother while I was in Philadelphia. It was, I had to involve a whole lot of other folks in the family to make that work. And I knew that, political office is just that every day.
Right.
And while I know there are excellent caregivers out there, my mother's caregiver among them, I have to give her a shout out for Tina Dobson.
Wow.
I knew that I couldn't depend on that, for everyday care. So this time, and 2020 was the pandemic. Nobody was going anywhere or doing anything.
Right.
And I was grieving. That's all there is to that.
Right, understandably.
So in 2021, the practice was sort of revving back up, and I was getting revved back up. I was getting new clients. It was all going really great. And then there was a suggestion made by a very good friend of mine in the party that I should think about running for state auditor. And for the first time ever, I could say I didn't have a ready-made excuse to say no, I can't do that. I don't have time. I sat down and said, I need to think about that.
Wow.
Because this is a new area of service and care.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I did. And once I got to the end of that process, my internal process, I decided that it's a good time for me to do this now. I've got the skills to do it, and I think this is a good time to do it. At my time in life.
Yeah. Well, I think that's awesome that somebody saw something in you and you took the time to reflect to say, is this something that I could do now, and do I have the skills required to do a good job?
I think that is what happens whenever I'm asked to do something new, or that is suggested that I try something new. Is to, is it good for me? Is it good for me in my life? Is it going to be good for them? And having sort of ticked down that list, that's what I came up with.
Wow, well, that's awesome. So, I mean, you've been involved in politics sort of from the background. Now you're emerging as a candidate, so you're in the forefront. And so you're a new face at the forefront, I would say, for some voters. So for voters that are distrustful of new faces, what would you say to them?
Well, new faces are how we get new leadership. I know a lot of times folks that are distrustful of politicians are saying, well, they're the same old folks. Well, they're not always the same old folks. Sometimes they're new folks, or sometimes they're new folks that are just now getting into it. But it's, folks that are distrustful haven't truly engaged, I think, in the process, because I am all about process.
Right.
Even my friends that are attorneys know that I'm always talking about process.
I'm picking that up from this conversation.
Okay. Once we've thought it out and we agree with it, that's what we probably ought to be doing. The process does need to be open to new things and new events, and we need to sometimes reevaluate process. But if we don't engage in the civil process of electing our leaders, and if we don't actually also hold them accountable, that's a setup for disappointment at the end of the day. Okay. And I'm sure, I can't think of right offhand, I'm sure there are people I voted for and it was like, why did I do that? Did I not think of a better reason? Did I not? Was there something about them that I didn't know? Was this obvious from the beginning? There's always room for self-doubt.
Sure.
But if you don't engage in the process, then you're going to be mistrustful. And then, the concurrent thing is, well, politicians have never done anything for me. I'm thinking, I can't think of any politician worth the name. And by the way, one of my older mentors in a whole nother world, also a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, used to say, people have given politician a bad rap.
Yes.
The term politician a bad rap.
Yeah.
The Greek root of that word is work of the people. That's what politics means, right. Work of the people. So a politician is supposed to be working for the people.
Right.
And if they're not working for the people, in this system, we can swap them out for somebody who could or will.
Right.
So that's why it's important, in my mind, to stay engaged with what's going on.
I think that's awesome. And I think you've dropped some gems there. I mean, so if anyone had a thought or an idea or were even tapped to run for a political office, can you talk to the viewers about what does it truly take to run for political office? To run for political office, you need a lot of friends. A lot of friends. Okay. It might sound kind of trite, but you need a lot of friends. And I think that's a really wonderful thing about Delaware is that there's a lot of people around that may know you that you don't necessarily know. They're probably your friends, and you don't know it necessarily. And that's something I have found out as well, is that there are people, and this is probably going to be something that happens to me more and more, there'll be more people who know me than I know them. Right. Okay. But there were a lot of people who knew me. So that work that I was doing in the party when I was the parliamentarian, I later went on to become the secretary of the committee. And that's how I got to really know everybody, because I had to call the roll every month. And I got to know everybody's name, what RD they represented, what was going on in their RD. Sure.
And then as treasurer, you're sort of, maybe not behind the curtain, but that's when you find out the actual mechanisms of how the party collects its money, how it chooses to spend its money, and what they're spending it for. So I think people might be surprised to know that most of that money gets spent on voting, what they call it voter engagement, which is get out the vote, just come vote. And the encouragement there is that when more people vote, we're going to get a better result. Okay, it's when we don't have engagement in the elections that we get odd results. And I'll just call it out. That was 2016, an odd result. That 2020, they sort of addressed that concern, and 2020 got you a different result.
Right.
Okay, so when people, and then I also tell people, because I've been moving up and down the state talking to folks in Kent and Sussex as well as in Newcastle County. But when people say they don't think their vote counts, I say ask the people in Kent County who, on more than one occasion that I can think of, have decided a race with a coin flip.
What was the answer to that?
I mean, that's what the rule provided for. That if you've done that if there's a tie, if they've reviewed the ballots, if they've figured it all out, and they're still in a tie, it's a coin toss.
Interesting.
So I think one vote would have made a difference there.
Sure.
Okay, so one vote is a majority. That's kind of what that is, half plus one.
That's right. So you talked about voter engagement, and you talked about the financial piece, and oftentimes we see political candidates seeking fundraising. What is the importance of fundraising, and how does it play in a successful bid for office?
What they're raising the money for is to get their message out. Okay, so they're raising money to pay the printer who's going to print the piece of literature that they're going to leave when they come door knocking. They're there to buy, so that they can buy the digital ads that you'll see on your phone and on your computer down the line, so that they can make sure that the people who are actually watching their Facebook page and their Instagram page and their Twitter feed, and I'm leaving something out, I know, but their social media broadly speaking, they need to pay those folks, okay, because nobody's doing it for free. That's the other thing. And then there's just then there's a filing fee. Okay, the rule here in Delaware is that the filing fee is set at 1% of the term of office salary potential, and that's the filing fee. So they're raising money so that they can get their message out.
Well, it takes so much time to go out and knock on the doors, do the fundraising, have all of the events. How does one do that and maintain a livelihood?
It's hard.
Okay.
There's no two ways about it. And I did warn the clients that I had in my practice who were active in the practice. I said, I may be a little harder to reach.
Okay.
But I'm still doing work for them.
Right. And that's honest. And it's really, good representation to communicate with your clients that way.
Well, that's, they needed to know.
Right.
And like I said, I'm still out there, still plugging away for them. And sometimes it's work that I'm doing, in odd hours. And I might be slow to respond, but, I'm still representing them. And it is, like I said, it just is hard.
Right.
I have actually recently cut back on the number of new clients, way back on the number of new clients. I'm just trying to keep the folks that are in the house relatively happy. Unless and until I have to make a harder decision.
I understand that, certainly. So let me ask you, has there ever been an African-American or an African-American woman running for this office of the Auditor of Accounts?
I can't necessarily speak to running for this office. Because for a really long time, this office was held by a Republican, and sometimes we didn't try very hard. But I can tell you that the current incumbent is the first woman elected to that position. So I'm going to go ahead out on a limb, should I be successful both in the primary and in the general, I'd be the first African-American woman.
Wow.
First African-American.
Another mark in history, potentially.
Which is I've always been wary of being that close to history, but it's okay.
Well, you mentioned primary, and many voters don't vote in the primary. So talk about why it's so important to vote in the primary generally.
Well, I'm going to just back it up one more step and say I think it's important every time you get a chance to vote, you ought to vote, because that's the way this system works. So I think if you need to show up and vote in your school board elections.
Why?
Okay. Why? Because they're the folks that are spending all your money at the end of the day. And you have a choice. You don't have to rely on who's been appointed to the Board of Education. You can put somebody on the Board of Education. But those are notoriously low turnout events.
Sure.
But I think that if more people did, your Board of Education would behave differently. That's just my, so I carry that lesson to primaries. If you're having a primary, that means the party can't decide among the many candidates that they're hoping to raise up into the position, and they're asking the voters to take a pick. You know, sometimes the party may ask you to consider some over others, as they have in this particular race.
Right.
But I think broadly speaking, they're saying, you know, we're not going to make that decision. The party members are going to make that decision. And so the party members ought to show up and explain, and say, this is what we think.
Okay.
And so this particular office, along with the Attorney General and the Treasurer, are elected in these off-cycle years.
Okay.
So it seems to me that the engagement ought to be even higher because these offices are important.
Right.
And that's all we have to think about.
Right.
So being engaged in the primaries is just another way of saying I have a voice in who it is that's going to be on the ballot.
Okay.
And then I'm going to make, generally speaking, people will turn out and vote for the winner of that primary.
Okay. So voters need to not only vote in the primary, but also vote in the general election as well.
Every time there's a polling place, you ought to show up at it. That's my opinion. And so, like I said, when I voted in my last school board election, oddly, I was asked by a reporter, did you just vote in the school board election? I said, yes. And they said, do you have children in the system? No. Why are you voting? I said, because there's an election.
That's right. That's right. So what do you want the voters to know about you that we haven't talked about already?
Well, what I want them to know is that I try really hard to get work done, that I am listening all the time. That's something my father taught me, to always, listening to what's going on. My mother is the one that taught me to act. But I think voters ought to know that one of the things that they ought to know is I got to tell them I am a Steelers fan.
Pittsburgh, right? Naturally.
But I root for the Eagles.
Okay.
Unless they're playing, because I told somebody, I said, we hate the same people. You hate the Cowboys, and so do we, and you hate New England, and so do we.
Yeah.
So I think, that's where I think we can work together
Right.
on who it is, unless we're playing each other, and then it's the Pennsylvania Bowl.
True.
But,
True indeed.
Other than that, I told you I've been leading, I think, a quiet life, but it's been a life in service.
Right. Well, quiet, but all the while people have been watching.
Apparently,
Right.
Again, because you never know who is watching.
That's right. Okay. Well, if voters or anyone wants to know more about you or want to get in touch with you or learn more about your campaign, how should they do that?
Well, I've got a website, which is York, 4 auditor.com. Okay. There's ways on there to learn more about me, to learn more about the campaign, to volunteer and to donate. And they can also send an email to me, Lydia@york4auditor.com, and that will get caught up in things. And then I'm going to say that they're probably going to be seeing a bit more of me in the coming weeks.
Okay.
And feel free to stop by. I'm prepared to talk to anybody. Okay. About most anything, actually.
All right.
But
do you have any events that you want to tell our listeners about?
I'm going to say the Peach Festival is coming up in Middletown. I'm going to be in that parade.
Okay.
I know the Hispanic Festival is coming up in September. I'll be present there as well. And to look for me in there. If there's a primary in your representative district, I'll probably show up there at some point.
Awesome. Well, I've really enjoyed talking to you today. And I look forward to seeing you and your name out there and hearing more about your platform and your campaign.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the time and this invitation.
Thank you. Thank you all. Today we've heard from Miss Lydia York, a finance professional, an attorney who's now running for the Office of Auditor of Accounts. It's a statewide office, and if successful, she would have a historic mark in the state of Delaware. She's given her information where she can be contacted, and we've learned so much today. I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of The Bar, and this is Brionna Denby. Thank you.